India has assumed presidency of the G20 at a very critical juncture. There's a war, there are conflicts, and there is acute food and fuel shortage. How is the world coming together, and among the various meetings that are taking place, what are the conversations? To discuss more on this, I'm being joined by Germany's ambassador to India, Ambassador Philipp Ackermann. Many thanks for joining us here on India Today.
Thank you, Nita.
A lot of issues to discuss, but let's begin with G20, given that everybody's prepping up for the meetings, 200 meetings in over 50 cities. How is Germany looking at India's presidency? What should the agenda be and the driving force for a consensus in issues such as conflict, war, and demand and supply?
So, first of all, I'd like to say we look at with great respect and admiration to the Indian government. They have set up a very, very ambitious program. You mentioned yourself 200 meetings across the country, and we have seen a huge effort being made in order to make this presidency a success. There's no doubt that India, as a president, is a heavyweight, and therefore expectations are high, and as you rightly say, geopolitical context is not as easy as it used to be a couple of years ago. We are very confident, though, that the Indian government will succeed in getting a meaningful presidency done. I think the agenda the Indians have set is very good. It's very convincing, and it needs a lot of diplomatic skills and finesse in order to get these very, very difficult countries, with very different countries together around one table. But we have confidence in the Indian government, and I think they'll succeed in doing this. We'll see it during the summit in September, when the leaders of the world will come to Delhi. But we have seen that even in the last summit in Indonesia, we had a very good statement at the end. So our expectations are high, our confidence is high too.
So you're being diplomatic. Being a diplomat, I will not be that. So I will call them difficult countries.
Yeah.
Difficult countries and a very difficult position that most countries are in, owing to the Russia-Ukraine war. There is going to be a huge push that this is not an era of war, which was also put in the Bali outcome document. But in terms of results, in terms of deliverables, do you see G20 really come at a consensus to deliver? Because we see documents, we see statements, but there has been no forward movement on delivery.
So what is difficult, maybe not the countries, but the overall situation is difficult. You have 20 countries around the table which are pursuing extremely different paths of making politics. And with the war in Ukraine, with the war of aggression by Russia, you have an additional problem on the table, which is, I think, so problematic that at the end of the day it will be a burden on the presidency's shoulders. But what you have to do, and there comes my confidence, is trying to bridge the 20 countries, the difference between the 20 countries. You should not forget there is also China around this table, a country that has also a very, very different approach to many things than, let's say, Western European countries or India. So what is required? A diplomatic finesse and skills in order to bridge these differences. And I'm pretty sure that the Indian government will deliver. But you have to say that out of this group of countries, as important these countries may be, you can't get, I think, a very, very concrete result to change the world overnight. You will not get that. But what you have to do is trying to find the common denominator, the consensus between the G20 countries, and I think I can imagine that India will find that consensus in this common denominator.
Talking about a future climate change, a very important aspect, Prime Minister Modi has been pushing for lifestyle for environment. In that context, we see that European nations have moved forward in making that transition. In the G20, how do you see the idea of climate justice, where India says those countries that are developing and have not had first movers advantage should be given the advantage, and the developed nations should step back a little? There's no consensus there as well.
There is no consensus in a very clear following or continuity of steps, but what we have seen in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I think you shouldn't forget that, is that the West has accepted this loss and damages idea, and that's a huge step in the right direction. We see India's dilemma very clearly. You have a population that moves every year to the middle class with demands, with requirements, with needs of energy and also more consumption in a way. So it's unlike the Western society. India is not saturated in this context, and we have to take that into consideration, and that must be part of our thinking. But and this is something where Germany and India bilaterally work very clearly together, is to try to do this development, to make this development of the population that moves into the middle class as sustainable as possible. In this context, I think the LIFE initiative is a very interesting one. The Prime Minister proposes something which I find very, very thoughtful, and it's worth looking at it very closely. But what we do, for example, together with India, is trying to change energy mix, so make more renewable energy, deliver more energy from renewables than from fossil energy. And there we have this Partnership for Green and Sustainable Development, which has as the main task to help India transition from a very conventional way of producing energy to a more sustainable one. And this is, I think, doable, and we are very proud that we are partners in India.
I'll come back to the partnership, but before that, given that Germany has closed the taps on the inbound Russian gas, how is Germany handling this challenge of transition? You're talking about it, but has that transition happened? The only advantage of climate change, I'm sorry to say, is the fact that this time has been a very warm winter that saved most of Europe.
That's true. It came in handy, let's say, in the
Yes.
warm winter. But you will be surprised. In I think February and March of last year, our share of delivery of gas was 53% was Russian gas. Now it's 0%. 0%. So we managed in very few times, a couple of months, to get a new energy mix. Now we have other providers increased their shares, but also new providers came in. And I have to say that right now, the gas price in Europe is the same as it was before the crisis. So the gas price has come down very clearly. I think that's a success of Europe, is that they change this share. The Russian share is gone. Oil is gone, gas is gone, and still we are at the gas price like before the crisis. And that's, I think, quite an achievement. So what we see is gas price comes down, people are less worried, government has come up with help also for the needy households, and we will see that also inflation will go down. We have the growth of Germany was much better than we expected, and the forecast for this year is that we don't go into recession as everybody thought last summer, but we say a small growth, maybe stagnation is what we expect. So I think we have come out of this crisis economically much better than we anticipated. But, and I want to say the big but, this crisis is not over.
Absolutely.
It is in full swing, and we don't see any glimpse of hope at the horizon so far.
Before I move to the bilateral agenda, final G20 aspect that everybody should be focusing on is the issue of women's rights, freedom. And while the conversation has moved to Iran, what's happening there, let's focus on Afghanistan and the situation in Afghanistan. Ambassador Sir, for somebody who has looked at the situation in the region and in Afghanistan, what is your reading on how should the world be engaging a Taliban that has been so oppressive when it comes to women and unrelenting despite the international pressure? They have not moved on ensuring that there is education for women, for girls, for students, and rights are curtailed.
So this is a very sensitive issue, and it is very emotional for myself. I have spent in my professional life years and years with Afghanistan and in Afghanistan also. And I remember very vividly how big our effort was to build girls' schools, to bring girls into education, to universities, what programs we ran in order to empower girls and make them a vibrant and very important part of society. And what we see now in Kabul and the decrease of the Taliban is just heartbreaking. I think that's the word we should use. It is the worst, possible outcome of this takeover. So how do we engage with them? I think it is certainly wise, or let's say it's the right thing to talk to them, to engage with them in order to make sure that what they do is basically seen as a catastrophe by the rest of the world. There is no one single country that recognizes the Taliban government, and even their so-called friends were very shocked when they heard about this decree. So we have to engage with them to make them understand that what they did is for us a big no, and we have to change that. But at the same time, we have also to make sure they must understand that this is not the way how to engage with the international community. So we have to stop programs that involve the Taliban as the acting government, even though we don't recognize it. We have to make them understand that that comes at costs.
Consequences. What are the red lines for the international community, for the West? Are there red lines? Are there red flags? Are there certain decisions that need to be taken to say thus far and no further to Afghanistan's Taliban?
So I think the red lines are crystal clear. No projects, no development work with the Taliban. It's not possible. So now comes a much more sensitive question. What do we do with humanitarian help? Humanitarian aid, humanitarian help is not linked to the government as such. It's done besides the government through organizations. Now, the Taliban have issued a decree that women are not allowed to work in international organizations anymore. That makes humanitarian help basically impossible. So if they want humanitarian aid, if they want help for their poor people, starving people, women and kids mainly, they need to review this document and this decree. And that is what we have to tell them day and night. And that's what we do. We, unlike India, we don't have an embassy. Indians have some people in Kabul. I think for good reasons we decided not to have. We have an EU delegation which is with some officers. So we engage with them regularly. So far to no avail. We have to say that very clearly, that we haven't succeeded in convincing them to change their mind. But we have to keep working on them.
And the fact that we are looking at a security situation in the region, just moving across the border to Pakistan. Earlier there was help for Afghan women, Afghans who want to leave the country via Pakistan. That no longer is the case because of the bilateral border issue. In terms of the security scenario, I'm taking a step further and talking about what Pakistan has to offer when it comes to stability. For India, it's probably not much. The recent designation of Abdul Rahman Makki, Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist, clearly shows the kind of support, help that Pakistan receives from China in blocking all these moves by European and American representatives at the United Nations Security Council. In that, how do you see the need for UN reforms to ensure that China does not continue supporting Pakistan on the issue of terrorism?
So let me start by saying that we are very pleased that finally, this Makki designation went through. We have been waiting for that for a long, long time. There is no doubt that this fellow should be on this list. I think there is no doubt about it. And we were very disappointed that China blocked it. But now we have moved a step forward, and this is important and good also. Now, when it comes to UN reform, our position is very clear. It's very similar to the Indian position. We feel that the Security Council should be reformed and should be composed by many, many other countries, and India should be at this table. There is no doubt about it. We feel that also Germany should be at this table. There's the G4 effort. You have to acknowledge, though, that right now the chances of getting the Security Council composition changed is very, very minimal. Not least because we have a big divide, the biggest divide in decades between Russia and the other permanent members of the Security Council. And therefore, I think movement in UN on the Security Council will be very difficult in the foreseeable future. I'm sorry to say that.
On that note, my final leg of questions on the bilateral agenda. G20 is a busy year. What are we looking at in terms of bilaterally engaging India? We have the finance track happening in February, foreign ministers track in March. What are the expectations? What are the visits that we can expect?
So let me start by saying the relations are at an all-time high, I would say, and that was became very clear when our foreign minister came in December. We had an excellent meeting with Dr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister of India, and we had a very good program on the side. My minister was very enthusiastic about India, and I think they have established a very good way of communicating, and I'm very happy about that. We will see a lot of high-ranking visitors this year, not only because of the G20, but maybe in the context of the G20, and that makes me very happy. Where are the areas of cooperation? I think there is, of course, first and foremost, a very rising interest in business. We'll have lots of interest in investment in India and joining forces with Indian companies, with new projects between Indian and German firms. You'll see that coming. We have this, as I just said, this partnership for green and sustainable development that with the Indian government, between the two governments, we will develop ways and means to improve renewable energy position in India. I think the Indians are fabulous partners because they see the need and they have a lot of creativity when it comes to that. So I think
are investors looking at India?
Yeah, they are absolutely looking at India. Yeah. And more, I would say, with this diversification movement, people feel that we should look beyond China in many ways, and India comes to mind. Then there is a third area which I would like to stress is the regional cooperation, and that I'd like to focus here on the Indo-Pacific a bit. You have seen Germany has developed more interest in the Indo-Pacific. I think there is more engagement from the German side. We plan now sending ships again, working together with the Indian Navy on this. This will be a very important point of our bilateral relations. And last but not least, a very important element, which I would call the people-to-people element. We will see an increasing number of Indian students going to Germany to study in German universities. We'll see also an increasing number of Indians coming to Germany to work for jobs. And therefore the Indian diaspora in Germany will grow very quickly, and we are, can I say, in all honesty, very happy about it. So we are looking forward to that.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today. That was the German ambassador to India speaking exclusively to India Today with video journalist Ashok Bhanot in New Delhi, Geeta Mohan for India Today.